Um, let's start today with a word. It's a word you hear probably every single day.
Right. It's everywhere.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
in the headlines. It's in our legislation. It's just the background noise of the 21st century. Terrorism. But if I put you on the spot right now and asked you to define it, really define it, could you? I mean, is it a war? Is it a crime?
Or is it just a mood? Right.
Eh,
It's the ultimate, I know it when I see it term.
Yeah.
And that is actually a massive problem.
Yeah.
Because if you ask a politician, a soldier, a police officer, and then a lawyer to define terrorism, you are going to get 4 completely contradictory answers.
Which is wild considering how much money and how many lives are spent fighting it.
Yeah.
So that is our mission for this deep dive. We're going to try to clear up that fog. We're looking into the mechanics, the psychology, and the structure of global jihad.
Right. And to do that, we've got a stack of sources that come at this from 2 very different angles.
Yeah.
We are combining high-level theory with the gritty reality on the ground.
Yeah, so first, we have the extensive work of Professor George Karim Chaya, specifically his 2010 book, Jihad Global. This gives us the geopolitical framework.
The why and the how on a global scale.
Exactly. And then, because theory can get a little dry, we're pairing that with a set of criminal profiling case studies and course materials that analyze specific attacks, like the London Bridge attack in 2017 and the beach massacre in Tunisia.
And just a quick note for you listening, we are dealing with intense, politically charged source material today. Our goal isn't to take sides or endorse the policies mentioned in these documents. We are just here to break down what the experts and the profiling data are actually saying.
Well said. We want to understand the machinery. How is this stuff financed? How does it differ from traditional guerrilla warfare? And what are the specific profiles of those who carry it out?
So let's go back to that definition problem. You said everyone defines it differently.
Right, we hear that cliche all the time. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. It always feels like a way to dodge the question.
It is a dodge. And Professor Chaya argues that this kind of moral relativism is actually incredibly dangerous. He posits that terrorism isn't defined by the cause. Whether you think the cause is just or not is irrelevant.
Yeah.
Terrorism is defined by the tactic.
So if we strip away the politics, what exactly is the tactic?
To understand that, Chaya actually takes us back to the French Revolution. The term terror originally comes from the Jacobins.
The guys at the guillotines.
The very same. But here is the twist. Back then, terror was a tool of the state. It was the government using violence to cleanse society and enforce virtue. It was entirely top-down.
Oh, interesting. So it was the ones in power doing it.
Right. But today, when we say terrorism, we almost always mean non-state actors attacking the state. But Chaya's definition focuses on the mechanics of the act itself. He defines it as the methodological execution of violent actions where the immediate victims are not the final target.
Wait, hold on. Unpack that. The victims aren't the target. That sounds counterintuitive. I mean, if you blow up a bus, surely the people on the bus are the target.
Physically, yes, but strategically, no. Think about it. If a bomb goes off in a fruit market, the goal isn't just to kill the specific people buying apples that morning. They are chosen completely at random, or maybe for some symbolic reason.
Right.
The real goal is to manipulate a much larger audience. You, me, the government watching on TV. It's done through psychological impact. The victim is just a tool, a billboard for fear.
That is deeply cynical. It makes the loss of life feel even worse somehow. You're just a prop in someone else's play.
Precisely. And this is where people often get confused between terrorism and guerrilla warfare. We see guys with guns and we lump them all together. But Chaya quotes Mao Zedong to make a really clear distinction.
The fish in the water quote.
Exactly. Mao said the guerrilla must move amongst the people as a fish swims in the water. Guerrillas usually wear uniforms, or at least some insignia. They control territory.
Right, they fight armies. They want to be the new government.
They want to hold ground. Terrorists, by contrast, usually operate in small, secret cells. They don't want to hold territory in the traditional sense. They want to spread panic. They actively avoid open combat with the military.
But wait, what about groups like Hezbollah or even ISIS at its peak? Because they held territory. They acted like armies.
And that's where the lines blur. You have these hybrid organizations. Hezbollah can act as a guerrilla army in South Lebanon, fighting tank for tank, and simultaneously act as a terrorist organization by, say, blowing up a community center in another country.
I see.
But the core distinction Chaya makes remains. If the primary goal is psychological impact over physical conquest, you are looking at terrorism.
Okay, so we've got the definition. It's a psychological weapon.
Yeah.
But even psychological weapons cost money. You can't pay for explosives or safe houses with just ideology.
Not at all.
One of the most fascinating parts of Chaya's work for me was how he breaks down the financing. He visualizes it as 3 circles.
This is a crucial concept. If you want to stop the machine, you have to know how it's fueled. Imagine a target. The bullseye, the inner circle, that's the terrorists themselves, the operatives.
The guys with the vests, the ones we see on the news.
Right. The money here goes to immediate needs. Explosives, fake passports, travel, rent for the safe house. And honestly, it's relatively cheap to pull off an attack.
Frighteningly cheap, yeah.
But surrounding them is the middle circle. These are the planners, the commanders, the preachers. And here's where the source material points out a massive hypocrisy.
I think I know where you're going. The guys in the middle circle aren't exactly roughing it in caves.
Far from it. The source notes that while the foot soldiers are sent to die, these individuals in the middle circle often live very comfortably. We're talking about leaders who send their children to private schools in Europe or go skiing in Switzerland.
That is infuriating.
Yeah.
So you have a guy in a comfortable chalet in the Alps recruiting a kid from a slum to blow himself up. He promises him paradise while ordering room service.
That is the grim reality of the business model. They live off the infrastructure of terror while sending others to be the ammunition. But the money has to come from somewhere to support all this. And that leads us to the outer circle.
The Guardian.
The Guardian. This is the most insidious layer. This includes NGOs, charities, educational systems, and certain madrasas. Now, this is tricky because they might actually do some legitimate humanitarian work.
Right, they might be feeding the poor or building a clinic in a war zone where nobody else is helping.
Exactly. But think of it as a loyalty trap. You have a village with no school, no food, no state presence. The Guardian Circle comes in, they build the school, they bake the bread, they become heroes to that community.
But there's a catch. The bread comes with a side of indoctrination.
The math books teach hatred. The sermons preach radicalism. Chaya points out that this is the most dangerous layer because it buys the hearts and minds of vulnerable populations before they can even read. It creates a debt of gratitude that is repaid in violence years later. You are essentially growing your own army.
So it's a complete ecosystem. You have the violent tip of the spear, the comfortable management class, and then this broad social net that feeds the machine with new recruits.
And it's not just charitable donations funding this anymore. Chaya talks about a convergence, a black hole where political and criminal motivations merge.
Because we used to think of criminals and terrorists as totally different species, right? Criminals want money, terrorists want political change.
But money is money. So now we see narco-terrorism, groups like FARC in Colombia, or the cartels, or various groups using drug trafficking, kidnapping, and smuggling to fund their operations.
The ideology might be political or religious, but the business practice is pure organized crime.
Exactly. Which brings us to the people actually doing the dirty work. We talked about the middle circle living the high life. But who are the people in the inner circle? There is this persistent myth that suicide bombers are driven solely by poverty, that they're just desperate people with absolutely no other choice.
The sources debunk that quite aggressively, don't they?
They do. And it goes back to that hypocrisy we mentioned. Chaya points out a simple, uncomfortable fact. No radical preacher or terror leader sends their own sons to be suicide bombers.
So who are they sending?
The attackers are often profiled as incited. They might be hot-headed, mentally vulnerable, or socially alienated. They are promised paradise, status, and often their families are paid off after the fact. It's a cold transaction.
Wow.
Chaya describes it as a weapon of the cruel and wealthy against the innocent. It's not an act of desperation, it's an act of exploitation of the vulnerable.
Let's move from the theory to the ground level then.
Yeah.
We have these criminal profiling case studies that really show what this looks like when it happens. The theory is the circles, but the reality is a Saturday night in London.
The London Bridge attack. June 3, 2017. This case study is a prime example of a massive tactical shift. It's the move to low-tech, high-impact terror.
It's terrifying because of how incredibly simple it was. There were no complicated bomb plots, no smuggling materials across borders, just a rental van and some knives from a hardware store.
Exactly. It was a warm evening. People were out in Borough Market, having drinks, enjoying the weekend. The attackers drove a van into pedestrians on the bridge, literally using the vehicle itself as a weapon. And then they jumped out and started stabbing people in the market.
The timeline is what struck me the most in the sources.
Yeah.
The whole thing, from the first crash to the attackers being shot dead by police, 8 minutes.
8 minutes. In the time it takes to boil an egg, 7 people were killed and 48 were injured. Daesh claimed responsibility. But the scary part for security services is that you almost can't stop this proactively. How do you ban rental vans?
You can't. How do you ban kitchenized? You just can't. It weaponizes normal, everyday life.
And speaking of weaponizing normal life, the second case study is even more jarring visually. The beach massacre in Tunisia.
Seuss at the Hotel Riu Imperial.
Yeah.
This really highlights the complete violation of safe spaces. We are talking about a holiday setting. The visual contrast is just brutal. Sunbeds, tourists reading books, kids playing in the sand.
And then a man walks onto the beach with a parasol and pulls a Kalashnikov out of it. He opens fire on the tourists right there on the beach, and then he chases them into the hotel.
The infographics in the source material suggest up to 37 dead, though some counts say at least 28, and many, many wounded.
It reinforces that idea that the front line isn't a trench anymore. It's a hotel lobby. It's a bridge.
And this brings up the whole issue of who these fighters actually are. In the Tunisia case, it was a local radicalized guy. But in many of these conflicts, we see the foreign fighter phenomenon. Westerners traveling to conflict zones.
Right, and the profiling documents go into a really specific, strange example of this. The case of Camarada Martos.
This part really twisted my brain. We usually think of foreign fighters as the bad guys. Some guy from Europe running off to join ISIS. But Martos was a 21-year-old Spaniard who traveled to the Middle East to fight against ISIS.
He joined the Kurdish militias to help liberate territory from the terrorists.
So in the movies, he's the hero.
Yeah.
He's the guy leaving his comfortable life to go fight the bad guys.
But in the real world, he returns to Madrid and immediately gets arrested. Because the group he fought with, the PKK and its associated Kurdish factions, are considered a terrorist organization by the European Union. This is due to their long, violent conflict with the Turkish state.
That is just wild. So you go to fight the terrorists, but because you joined the wrong group to do it, you become a terrorist yourself in the eyes of the law.
It perfectly highlights how legally complex modern conflict is. And that leads us directly into what Chaya calls the asymmetric war of the 21st century.
Asymmetric usually just means lopsided, right? Like a big army versus a small rebel group.
Yes, but Chaya uses a specific word. He calls it idiosyncratic. It means this war completely refuses to play by established rules. And this creates massive, fundamental dilemmas for democratic states.
The sources pose these really uncomfortable questions. For example, what do you do if the enemy is hiding behind children? Do you shoot back?
Exactly. Or do you raid a hospital if your intelligence says it's being used as a terror headquarters? Do you stop and search every single ambulance because terrorists have started using them to transport explosives?
If you stop the ambulance, innocent people might die because it's delayed. If you don't stop it, innocent people die because a bomb gets through. It's a total lose-lose situation.
That is the trap. The expert analysis emphasizes that terrorists exploit the morality and the laws of democratic states. They know we follow the Geneva Conventions. They know we value civil liberties. They use those exact values as vulnerabilities.
They essentially say, we know you won't bomb this school, so we will put our weapons cache right here. They turn our own ethics into a shield.
Precisely. So how do states respond to that? The sources talk about a massive shift in intelligence agencies. The CIA, European services, they had to completely change their operational mindset. They moved from reactive to preventive.
Because in traditional policing, you wait for a crime to happen, you investigate, and you catch the guy. But you can't wait for a suicide bomb to go off to investigate it.
The damage is already done, so the goal shifts to stopping it before it ever happens. But to do that, you need vast surveillance. You need to track financing globally. You need to monitor communications.
Which brings us to the legislative side of things. The sources mention the Patriot Act in the U.S. and similar measures in Europe. And again, just objectively reporting the source here, these laws are incredibly controversial in international law.
They push right up against the boundaries of civil liberties. We are talking about preemptive action, massive data collection, tracking ordinary citizens' finances.
But the argument from the state's perspective is, in an asymmetric war, where the enemy acknowledges absolutely no laws and wants to cause mass casualties, can we afford the luxury of waiting?
It feels like we are constantly trying to balance on a tightrope between safety and freedom, and the wind is blowing hard.
Let's zoom out to the big picture before we wrap up. We've talked about the mechanics, the money, the tactics, the profiles. But what is driving this globally? Chaya touches on the famous clash of civilizations theory.
He does, but he actually critiques it. The original theory argued that the world is divided into these big warring blocs, Western, Islamic, Confucian, and so on. Chaya argues it's more nuanced than that. He says there is really only one human civilization. We are all connected. But within that one civilization, there are distinct cultural entities.
It sounds like a subtle distinction, but what does it mean for the actual fighting?
It means the fault lines aren't economic anymore. It's not capitalism versus communism like it was during the Cold War. The source argues that future conflicts will be inherently cultural. It's about identity. Who are we and what do we fundamentally believe?
And he mentions rogue states playing a big role in this.
Yes, states that use terrorism as a state policy to fight proxy wars against the West. He specifically mentions Iran using proxy groups to project power, but he also dives into the complexity of countries like Turkey.
He calls Turkey a torn country, right? Torn how?
Geographically and culturally, it's a NATO member. It sits right on the edge of Europe. It wants that Western integration. But culturally, historically, and religiously, it has deep, deep ties to the Islamic world and the East.
So it's pulled in two directions.
Exactly. Chaya warns that these torn countries are essentially where the tectonic plates of these cultural entities grind together. That friction creates immense heat and, very often, violence.
It really connects back to the guardians we talked about earlier, the outer circle. If the conflict is cultural, then the ultimate battleground is the mind. That's why those educational systems and madrasas are so vital to the terror infrastructure. They are building the ideological soldiers for a cultural war.
That's exactly how the machinery sustains itself across generations.
So let's quickly summarize what we've covered. We've moved from understanding terrorism not just as random violence, but as a calculated psychological tactic where the victim is merely a message.
We've looked at the three circles of financing: the operatives, the comfortable planners, and the charitable fronts that trap vulnerable communities.
We've seen the brutal reality of the tactic shifting, the sheer speed of attacks like London Bridge, and the violation of safe spaces like the beach in Tunisia.
And we've seen that we are locked in a period of asymmetric conflict. The old rules of war, the uniforms, the defined battlefields, they just don't apply anymore. The front line is quite literally everywhere.
It's a lot to process. It makes you realize that what you see on the news, the explosion, the sirens, the aftermath, is just the very surface of a incredibly deep, complicated machine.
It is. And if we connect all this back to the bigger picture, the sources suggest a really provocative thought for everyone listening.
What's that?
Well, think about how we generally view war and peace. We tend to view peace as the natural state of things. War is a temporary interruption, a malfunction that we have to fix so we can get back to normal, peaceful life.
Right. We fight wars to achieve peace.
But the analysis suggests that for the global jihadist, the perspective is entirely flipped. They view the struggle, the jihad, as the perpetual natural state of the world until their ultimate ideological goal is achieved.
So for them, peace isn't the goal.
No. For them, a ceasefire or a period of peace is just a tactical pause. It's merely a chance to reload and regroup.
Honestly, that's terrifying. Because if that's true, how do you even negotiate?
That is the ultimate question. If one side views peace simply as a temporary pause in a perpetual war, how can traditional diplomacy ever succeed?
It seems like it can't.
And it leads to an even harder question for us. Are democracies willing to compromise their own foundational legal principles to win a war against an enemy that acknowledges no laws at all?
Can we fight this machinery without breaking the very things that make our societies worth defending in the first place?
It's the defining dilemma of asymmetric warfare, and the sources offer no easy answers.
That is definitely something to mull over. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. Keep questioning, stay curious, and we'll catch you next time.